this great and wonderful trigger and trigger guard thingy, and this little pommel bit. Also, these little circly bit here's that are probably like, they're clearly space heat sinks to keep the magic bullet from exploding the rest of the gun. All right, so first things first is we're gonna Shift D to duplicate this little bit over here, because and make sure to only move it in edit mode space, because if we were to move the object, actually I'll just show you. So if we remove the object and we want it to be over here, the axis that it actually mirrors off of is now moved. So we want to undo that and bring it back to our position. So now I can go and reposition my mesh. Okay. So we're going to add another circle. Or spheres. Sphere this time. We love spheres. So mesh. Let's do UV sphere. Let's hit T to bring over our properties. Let's bring it down to 8 and 8. 8 segments, 8 rings. T to bring it back. And we've got our fancy little sphere right here. I'm also going to wipe out half of it so that we can mirror it. We're mirroring everything. Gotta love those mirrors. And we can always undo them later if we want to give a certain area more texel density. And if you do not know what texels are texture pixels. And that is what we will be using in our UV space. Just gonna scale this object down. Gonna put it in the right spot. Woo! Okay, and I'm gonna make sure that we put it over here. And I'm gonna clip it so that we have our little points doing their pointy thing. And the pole is facing the camera. Okay, so let's add a cube. So Shift A, add a cube. And again, mirror modifier. I love the mirror modifier. So Control up, because I'm just going to model a little bit in this. I'm going to drag it out. We see our phantom cube on the other side. Turning on clip. And I'm going to hit Control Tab to switch to faces. Go to the inside face. Delete that face. Nope. Delete that face. So notice how I deleted vertices. It deleted all the vertices involved with that face, which is pretty cool. And go back to vertex mode. Gonna clip them together. Whoop. Okay. So we've got these strange bean shapes here right now. And what I want to do is I want to turn this object into a strange bean shape. So I'm going to hit W and go to subdivide smooth. And it's going to create our little subdivided box, which is kind of great. And this is roughly the amount of polygons I want for it. And we can always add more density or lower it depending on our needs. I'm just going to kind of rough it into this shape. Just box selecting and dragging. And we're going to Shift D to duplicate it, put it over here. I actually do want this to be a little bit longer because I want it sticking out in front of this this chamber. Okay. And let us kind of wiggle these parts together too. Wiggling parts together is a very technical term. I'm actually going to bring it in a little bit because I want it to be... I can just rotate this. Just rotate it like this. And this is roughly the shape that I want. I'll drag a little bit more out to make it more accurate to our concept art, which is the greatest illustration I've ever made. I am not a illustrator. I am a sculptor. So that is why I'm teaching you modeling instead of how to draw things. Okay, so back to the side view. Now we're going to harvest polygons from this shape. So we're going to select it, go into object mode, and then we're going to select a set of polygons. So Control Tab, face, and now I'm just going to duplicate this, and then I have to separate it by selection. And hopefully I actually did duplicate it. And edit mode, grab. Okay. Just checking my model up here to see if I made a hole. Nope. Okay, good. We are fantastic on that. So what I want to do is go back to vertex mode, hit Z to shift back into wireframe mode, and I'm just gonna give myself some space to work. I'm just gonna move these points around, and that should have grabbed it. Come on, what's going on? So my screen is apparently not updating as fast as it should be, and I'm just gonna extrude it out. I'm going to keep extruding this face around this shape that I want, scaling, rotating, and I'm just going to keep going. So this is a general purpose technique, just moving points around. You can model basically anything this way. The only issue with this style of modeling is that you have what is called shells, multiple shells, and you don't want that if you're going to be doing 3D printing, because the program, or the 3D printer has no idea where out is. And I just have to make sure to go to Control Tab, Faces, delete Faces, because I don't want that inner ring. Control Tab, Edge, drag this in, and we're clipped. We're good. And actually, got to flip these normals around. So flip them, and then I'm going to actually add an additional ring here, so I can have a little bit of depth to this trigger guard. And Alt right click to drag that one in. And I'm actually going to grab the whole thing, with the exception of the inner workings. Control Tab, Vertex. I love working in Vertex mode. It's very comfortable for me. And let's create the trigger. Shift D, P. Select this. Go into edit mode. Rotate. Or actually, I don't even have to rotate. These are boxes. So I'm gonna just pull this out. I'm adding depth within it so that I don't have to deal with weird rotations, and also this object would probably have some kind of inner workings like that anyways. I'm just going to duplicate this, Shift D, and then I should be able to just rotate it into place. They're both roughly the same size, except this one I want to make a little bit thinner, so Control Tab, right click, bring it in, and now I have a little trigger bit. And yes, so I'm very close to time. Let's see if we can quickly create this little pommel bit. So mesh, icosphere, and T, subdivisions 1. Okay, cool. Now we have a little gem thingy. And I just broke that rule by scale, rotate, scale, move. All right. That's good. That's good. That is where I want it. This is where we're ending for this lesson, and I hope you have a wonderful time blending. Happy blending. And up to go back to our multiple window views. I'm gonna also now add actually, we're gonna go to a different layer. So remember the hotkeys at the top of your keyboard to switch layers. So 1, 2, 1, 2. So I'm on the second layer. I'm going to hit Shift A to add a cylinder. I'm going to add, actually, so one thing I have to note is that on my cylinder, I have switched the cap fill type to nothing. And that will now make it so that when I generate a cylinder, it's going to have 16 verts. It's going to have no triangle fan or any kind of polygon up top. And that's what we want, because we are building basically like this tube or conduit, and this can be used for wires or any other kind of like object that moves along a curve. So you can like even make like spinal bones and things like that. All this really cool stuff. And we're going to use the array and curve modifier to do that. So now we need our curve, which is our handy dandy Bezier curve, and there it is on this layer. And here we go. So to set it up, we actually have to do a few things. So we're going to scale this down to about that big. That's fine. That should be okay. Actually a little bit smaller, Now we're going to affect our curve by rotating it 90 degrees this way. Actually, let's rotate it 90 degrees this way, -90, and see what happens this time. Add modifier, array. Actually, also I have to set it up so that it is a horizontal cylinder instead of vertical. And we need to switch our array to 1 and remove this so it's going in a line instead. And another thing is if you select merge, when we apply the mesh, it'll merge those verts together, and also it'll merge them in this mode as well. So now we also need to add the curve modifier. And what the curve modifier does is it bends objects around curves. So because we have both of them oriented correctly, we will be able to actually track our object along the curve. So we can increase our count, we can switch to the curve, and in wireframe mode you can see that I can actually manipulate it, rotate, all this other fun stuff, rotate, and if I select, I can subdivide it too, so I can add an extra point of control, and we can just kind of move things around, and it's modifying our mesh to those constraints, which is fantastic. You can actually animate it with this as well, and that's an incredibly powerful tool. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to add a little bit of detail to our mesh. And because it's duplicated through the modifier stack, it's just going to propagate on all the other ones. So I'm just going to pull this in, and now we have like a little neat design on our shape. And over here, I'm going to start positioning it. And I'm just going to drag this up and start looking at how I want this mesh to behave. Rotate it this way, and make sure I'm on the side view. So what I want to do is I want to actually give this a little bit of weight. So I'm going to curve this down a little bit. I'm actually going to curve both of them a little bit down so that they curve like this. So it's like it's as if there's gravity. And as everyone knows who's watching this video, as an artist, you are trying to mimic the laws of nature. Or actually, well, unless you're doing abstract stuff, then you kind of just do whatever you feel like, which is pretty cool too. Nothing wrong with abstract art. I'm just gonna scale it up a little bit, and here we go. We've got our little tube. Gonna pull it out over here, and now we have to reposition it. So go back to the edit mode of the curve editor, and I'm gonna pull it out. I've found that if you're working in the object mode, if you're not moving both the curve and the arrayed object, things will get kind of weird. And we don't want that, because then we have to reposition things. Also notice how it tracks along and kind of pulls with it. So we can go here and add more to the end. Rotate, position. Just doing a lot of little modifications on where we're going, and I would like to have the geometry pierce into it, and we're going to create caps to kind of show that we are connecting to it in like a specific way. Okay, so to create the caps, I'm gonna go to mesh circle, and just like with the cylinder, I'm gonna have 16 verts, and yeah, triangle fan. We're gonna use a triangle fan because we're gonna have that anyways later on. Hit T to go back, and I'm just gonna go into large mesh mode or large window mode. Extrude, and okay. So we've got this mesh. I'm gonna actually move it to a different layer so we can work on it better. I'm gonna move it to layer 3. And here we go. So Control Tab to switch to edge mode, scroll in. Yeah, and then you can also click down here to switch modes as well. I'm going to extrude up, extrude in, because I want it to have a little bit of a bevel. And I'm just going to wipe out the polys in the back. Delete faces. Okay, so this is going to be our cap. And let's go here. Let's see where our little ring is. Little curve modifier. And let's just start rotating things into place. Actually. Ooh. So that did not operate the way I expected it to. Let me just move it into place like this. And I'm going to show you something very, very important. So we're going to rotate it. And notice how I'm rotating and stretching and doing all this other fun stuff in object mode. And how I told you, you should never do this. And that's because you could forget this step and have to basically figure out what you did not do correctly, or which object doesn't have the transforms applied to them. Because if you bring it into Unreal Engine or Unity or whatever, it's going to do its fun little explodey thing. And so we've got our little nodes positioned. We're going to now hit spacebar, type apply, and we want to do object transform. Very important to this step. Hit T. Notice over here it's going to say location, rotation, scale. We're going to hit scale and rotation. And what that's going to do is over here in the numerical panel, we're going to notice that our scale is zeroed, our rotations are zeroed, and if we check out this other one, we can see that our rotations are not zeroed, and also we can scale it. Blah blah blah. I can show you that, and spacebar apply object transform. It's going to reset our rotation and scale. So now when we hit tab, it's going to always be like that. So it's not going to revert in any kind of manner. All right. So this lesson, we checked out the curve and array modifiers, and I showed you how to reset the object. You can tell since the last time we've met, I have made some tweaks to my model, and primarily it was just me moving vertices around for half an hour, and I'm sure you guys don't want to have 3 more videos on just that. So let's move to technique and getting some cool things out. All right, so I created little ridges on this heatsink thing, and our gun barrel has changed dramatically since the last time. So I'm going to show you how to do that stuff. So down here, notice I've got other layers. These are where I'm hiding my little Julia Child-esque extra baking pans. So here we go. We've got our heatsink, and right over here, we notice that there's a ridge form up here. And to create that, all we have to do is Control R, create another edge loop over here, slide it into place. And now, over here, I'm going to hit Control Tab to switch to face mode. Select those faces, select those, Alt right click, Alt Shift right click to add that loop. And now I'm going to just kind of extrude it, kind of scale it out a little bit. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my edge select mode, right click and drag in, right click, I got to select the proper edges, drag that in, and here I'm just going to kind of tweak this point back into place. So yeah, that those potentially 30 minutes of tweaking would be a lot of, oh, I need to move this point around. Okay, so switching back to faces mode, I'm going to grab this one. We're going to extrude the rear heatsink as well. We're going to kind of make it around the same size. Same technique as before, Alt right click. I think I grabbed the wrong one, yeah. Alt right click. Ah, come on. Okay, switch back to faces, drag that out because the geometry was piercing into the other one. And now Alt right click on the ones in the back and pull them in. So now we've got our ridges on our heatsink. Hooray! So the next thing we've got to build is the pointy end on this fancy gun. So looking back at our concept art, we've got our cylinder here, and I'm going to bring this over here, scale it down, And remember that if we're working with a mirror modified mesh, we always have to deal with the warp involved in moving things away from the center. And by scaling, you're moving points around as well. So we need to compensate for that. So to create this object, what we need, I'm going to switch back to this mode and biggen this window. We need to switch to vertex mode so we can drag these points over, drag these points over here. And what we need now is to create a edge loop here. So an edge loop that goes here at the beginning of our pointy bit. And I'm going to create an edge loop here and an edge loop here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this to cut a hole here and replace it with some geometry so that we can actually have our little pointy bit. And by pointy bit, I'm referring to the the barrel of the weapon. So now I'm going to delete this because we don't need it anymore. And to continue constructing this, I'm going to hit extrude there, drag these points in. And now we can actually just fill this. So we can fill these points and all right. So notice this point. So you see how the line goes kind of partially out there? What that means is that it doesn't seem to actually be connected to that. So what we can do is, because I'm fairly certain that there are duplicate vertices in here, to get rid of them, select everything. And I don't remember the hotkey, so I'm going to hit spacebar and search for remove doubles. And I've removed 6 vertices. So this was good because this could have caused us problems in the future. And I don't like having problems like that. So whenever you've done enough modeling, go and check your models for extroverts, which is never a fun thing to have because it can cause serious problems, especially if you're 3D printing. So I'm selecting these polys, or these verts, and hitting F to fill them. And now, Control Tab to face mode, select this. I'm going to extrude this out. And this is going to be our pointy bit. I'm going to check our concept art. I'm going to bring it back around here. Kind of scale it in a little bit. Pull it in. And notice how it's kind of like a cone shape. To fix that, what we can do easily is create an edge loop, slide it all the way back here, just kind of tweak that in. So we can still have the little cone shape in here, but we don't want all that jazz coming out in the side of the barrel, because we want it to look like a little nib pointing out of this, like an old sci-fi weapon that the likes of Flash Gordon or someone would like to use. Okay, so going back to our tweaked volume mesh, and I'm going to show you a little extra thing that I did as well. So over here with the little magic gem thing, I added in a couple more loops to create a little holder for it, like we have in the concept art. And a very interesting aspect is that this is an icosphere, and it does not have bilateral symmetry, mainly because it's a different way of creating this shape, and it's a 5-pointed triangle, or it is a 5-sided shape, so it doesn't really translate well into the mirror modifier. So when we're going to unwrap, it's going to be slightly different. In our next video, I'm going to be showing you is how to set up a interesting workflow for sculpting that's kind of like subtools in ZBrush, and that it involves. Okay, so we're in object mode, and first things first, we're going to select the camera and the light. We're going to move that to a different layer. I'm going to move it to this one. Boop. So that's just a way of life thing that I like to do. We're going to select our object. We're going to hit Shift D. We're going to move that to a different layer as well. So basically what this is doing is, in the future, we might have to be doing a little bit of retopology, and this is keeping us with a sweet base mesh to work on, so we don't actually have to do too much work in that step of the process. Okay, so back to our now going to be high definition mesh, and the way we're going to do that is I'm actually going to show you a little workflow advice from that kind of meshes with ZBrush. So what we can do is we can right click to select different objects, and interestingly enough, that also works in sculpting mode. So we right click our little top flange here, and then we go to object mode, switch it to sculpt mode. Now we have our little green sculpting cursor, which is pretty sweet. And what's cool is that because we modeled this in separate objects, it'll operate kind of like subtools in ZBrush. So we can kind of move these things around and it won't affect the other parts of the geometry. So we can right click and switch to this one, and we can switch this one to sculpting mode as well. But what's cool is that when we go back to this by right clicking, we can continue to sculpt. But if we switch over here, it's back to object mode. So it keeps what mode what object is on, which is really cool. Now we're going to get into dynamic topology, because that is the most bizarre sculpting and really extremely useful tool that Blender has. So I'm going to hit T to bring up my tool panel, and I've got my grab brush. A very important thing to notice is that with dynamic topo, not all of these brushes will work. Really the ones that will work are the ones like the brush like I believe pinch works, and the snake hook, which is for the first time I've ever found useful while using something like this in dynamic topo. It's kind of like live clay in 3D Coat. All right, so I'm going to select my brush, and I am going to select my fancy top bit so we can look at this in majesty and wonder. And first things first, I'm going to show you some hotkeys. So F to increase the size of the brush, which is extremely useful so you don't have to move off, and Shift F to change the strength of the brush. So the smaller the circle, the more intense the effect is. So Shift F and F, Shift F, F. Okay, so I'm just going to make it kind of small. 60% is okay. And first thing first, I'm going to go down here and make sure that, actually, hold on, options, make sure that threaded sculpt is on, fast navigate's on. Okay, good. Going back to tools, going down to Dyne Topo, enable it, and it's going to triangulate our mesh. Also, if you notice, it's going to get rid of the mirror modifier. So I'm going to hit tab. We're going to see we're back in edit mode, but we have our whole mesh back. Tab again, switch back to sculpt mode, and notice how this side's come back. This side's triangulated and still happy and stuff. And Dyne Topo is no longer on, so we have to turn it back on every time we want to do that. So we're going to start sculpting like it's sculpting mode, right? So we just kind of sculpt, and oh no, it's this huge, messy, gross thing. Control Z. Actually, that's fine. That's fine. So this is showing you something important. So the way to control this brush is based off of screen size pixels, which is weird and cool. So over here, if we zoom in, we actually start affecting it again. And what it's also doing is it's automatically tessellating for us. So if we hit tab to go and see what it's doing to our mesh, it's creating these little tessellations, which is awesome. It's like putting Sculptress directly into our program. Again, going back from edit mode, you have to enable Dyne Topo again. And so this cursor is based on screen space. And to edit that, so over here is the maximum edge length for dynamic topology sculpting in pixels. So again, 30 pixels, and it's going to create a new edge. So let's go down to, let's say, 10. So on our screen, we will have 10 pixels, and it'll be glorious. So I'm going to just draw out a little thing over here. We can actually zoom in further, and we want more detail, so we can create a little smiley face or whatever. So that is one of the most powerful tools in Blender. And what's crazy is that we can, what's thankfully in the software is that we can actually remove these edges and smooth them over. So what we have to do with that is we go to collapse edges instead of subdivide edges, and it'll wipe out that detail. So if we go back to edit mode, we'll notice that our crazy tessellation in that area is no longer there. Enable Dyn Topo. And this shows like different kinds of detail settings, etc. Optimize will kind of regenerate the mesh for a bit. And if we didn't have our fancy mirror modifier on, what we could do is enable Dyn Topo, and we could click the symmetrize button, which would copy the negative x-axis to the positive x-axis. And in this, for this situation, positive x is this way, and so it'll just kind of wipe out our mesh. Okay, so other interesting things to note about this tool is that, like, say, I mentioned the grab brush doesn't let you generate topology, so notice how it hasn't built anything like that. So a way around that is we can go to our brush brush, and we can enable Dyn Topo. We can kind of paint in the geometry here. Actually, let's kind of paint it in like that. And I'm on collapse edges, so remember you have to switch the modes again. So what this is doing is we are regenerating the topology a little bit. I'm going to hit tab to show you. So now we can go to the grab brush again from our brush, and we can just kind of pull things out a little bit more. So we have a lot of control with that. But if you want to create an object like that, use the snake hook, because it just works with dynamic topo. And we can just pull this out, and we can pull out, I'm just going to make it huge and pull this out. And it's tessellating as we go. So it's creating the geometry that we need to fill our volume. Okay, so with our dynamic topo little tutorial is done, we can move on to actually sculpting this thing. So in the next lesson, we'll be sculpting our mesh. It'll be great. All right, see you then. That we made a mistake in a previous tutorial. And that's good, because it shows you that I can, or it's showing you a aspect of Blender that you wouldn't normally see. So right here, I'm going to actually join these areas together. So you right click on that little header, and we're going to zoom in over here. So what's going on is that we have these normals, and I've noticed that they're actually flipped. So when we were trying to sculpt last time, it was actually pushing in instead of pulling out. So now to actually access it, we have to open up the numerics panel. If you hit N, that's what it opens. And over here down in mesh display and normals, click that. It'll show you like little blue dots on our shape here. And in order to actually see them, we can hit Z and see how the normals are actually facing from the normals inwards. And to fix that, what we can do is select all and type in flip normals, and that'll flip the normals back out. And we just turn these back off so we don't see them, and now we can continue sculpting. So object sculpt, and then turning off N, opening up T, and we are going to take our brush, and we're actually going to create a secondary brush from it. So the way to do that is to actually click on this plus sign. That'll change our name from brush to brush 001. And now I'm going to change the brush name to actually Dam Standard, which we're going to be creating a brush that's very much like the Dam Standard brush in ZBrush. So now we go down to curve, and what we basically need to do is click this, and I'm going to drag this down a little bit to make it sharper, and I'm going to delete this. So this is going to be a very, very close fall off curve. So now we should have a brush that acts similarly to the Dam Standard brush. And you can actually save this as the default preset, so you don't have to create a new one every time you want to sculpt. And you can actually import them and append from other blend files, which is actually quite awesome. So Blender is phenomenal for customization. So I'm gonna enable Dyna Topo. Gonna go down to 5 for detail size, and I'm just gonna do a quick show and tell of what this thing can do. So gotta zoom in a little bit more. I'm not used to this screen size. Zoom in, bring down the pixels to, let's say, 2. Now cut. So now it acts very much like the damn standard brush in ZBrush. I'm just going to cut in. So now we can create creases and such pretty quickly. It's a very, very, very handy tool. So what I want right now is I actually want to smooth this form out in a general sense. So I'm actually going to go back to my brush and let's increase the detail size to say 5 or so. That should give me enough verts to play around with. And let us move over here. Okay, I'm going to increase the size of my brush because I'm going to do a general kind of treatment to it, and I'm going to hit Shift F to lower the effect it has. I'm just going to drag over the whole thing. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually generating more topology for us to be able to manipulate. And I'm going to hit Tab so you can see all that density right there. So that's good. That's what we want. And what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to go to my awesome smooth brush, and I guess we can enable Dyna Topo. And if I smooth, it just kind of smooths out the shape. It's like I ran a subdivision subdivision modifier on it. So now we can kind of smooth that out and reshape our mesh to what we want. And I'm gonna just keep switching back to the other brushes, so damn standard. And I want to make this crease apparent. So I'm just gonna kind of cut it down, and I'm gonna go in. So Control. If you hold down Control, it cuts. And just keep doing that. Again, if you want to zoom in, you can to create the more fine details. I'm just going to increase the brush size a little bit. Just going to cut in here. And I'm going to be smoothing out lots of things. I'm using a Wacom tablet right now because I find it incredibly helpful for when you're actually sculpting. And I have not gone a day without using it ever since I started this whole digital sculpting thing. So if you want to do yourself a fantastic favor, please go out and get some kind of drawing tablet, because it'll help you out significantly with this kind of artwork. And I'm just going to keep smoothing it out, smoothing out, smoothing out. And the polish is kind of like the H polish brush in ZBrush, so you can kind of like flatten out little shapes and such. But I'm just going to go back to smooth. Make a happy little tree. So I'm going to keep doing that. And if we want to see how our mesh is doing on both sides, we can hit Tab and go back to object mode. So these little points up here, we're going to get rid of those later. Right now, it's basically an effect of the symmetry. And yeah, that's nothing really to worry about. Okay, so I'm going to say that is where I want this right now. I'm going to be doing a pass over the whole thing, but right now I want to smooth out this little stalk or handle, and sculpt mode. I'm going to do the same technique. I'm going to take my brush. I keep making that joke. And I'm going to, actually first off, I'm going to make sure that in edit mode, our normals are facing the correct direction, and I see that they're facing out. So yes, I will be able to use my tools the way I want them to. I'm going to go back to sculpt mode, and now I'm going to enable Dyna Topo, because you have to do that for every single one. Detail size 5, that's good. And gonna increase the size of the brush, lower the effect, and I'm just gonna paint over the whole thing. Okay, so checking to see that I have my tessellation. Good. Now I'm going to go in and start sculpting or smoothing or whatever it is that you intend to do after adding the geometry. So I'm just going to kind of smooth it out. And I feel like I need more geometry in that area, so I will go back to the brush and re-enable this. Come in a little closer so I can create the detail that I need. I'm gonna go over here, do that over here. So it's screen space and not actually how big or small the brush is, which is a very strange way to work. But anyways, so using these techniques, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to smooth out the other forms that I feel need to be smoothed, and I will catch up with you next time, and happy blending!